Hi everyone, this is a class on psychosocial disability. I would like to start with a quote by Anne Margaret Vial, who wrote a book, Give Me Your Hand So That I Can Talk. She is a person with severe autism, and she said, My hat is split in two parts. I know things, but I cannot say them. So when we talk about mental disabilities, we used to say mental retardation. We can also call it difficulties in learning. Some people call it psychosocial disability, which is a term that I like and prefer. But it's a disability that affects all aspects of personality, mental, physical, or social. It means that someone may have low IQ that might not be um, and might not be able to do certain things. However, we will talk about the concept of IQ in this class a little bit. It's very biased, and just because someone has low IQ, that might not be enough to call someone mentally or developmentally disabled. Mental and developmental disability is when a person is failing to fulfill basic daily functions appropriate for his or her age. What we have learned in the past is that in the history of the United States, there were some ethnic groups and nations that were called mentally retarded, like Italians and Polish people, Russian people, because they came to the United States and had a different lifestyle, and they also did not speak any English. Also, people of African origin were called Negros at that time, were deemed less intelligent due to the lack of their education or illiteracy or working status. Also, women were deemed less intelligent until the 70s. Uh, there is something that's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and the fourth edition of it used the term mental retardation until about 2013. Now, the newest DSM-5, which is pretty much the Bible for diagnosing and classifying all illnesses, diseases, and disabilities, uses the term intellectual disability. This will very likely become pejorative in the future, like many other terms referring to people with mental disabilities. Some talking about history of treatment of people with mental disabilities in ancient Greece, beginning of Asclepions, they were pretty much doctors and who established homes to cure and treat people with any kind of disabilities. During Middle Ages, people started to found hospitals and churches because people with mental disabilities were believed to be God's punishments until about the 19th century. So they were placed in hospitals and run by churches. During Renaissance, what was very famous was fighting witchcraft. Some women who might have had mental disabilities or developmental disabilities were believed to be witches, and so it was common to burn them. Also, it was common to seclude people with mental disabilities from society. They could be put on ships and boats, and there were tidal ships of men, and just sent out there to the ocean. In the 18th century, big institutions appeared for the first time, and people were treated like prisoners in them. In the 19th century, there was a radical change when large institutions were established and also special schools and special hospitals. So it started the separation of people with disabilities, mental disabilities, in special, quote unquote, special institutions. And now in 20th and 21st century, we started talking about integration and mainstreaming, which meant that the majority of society would adjust to people with disabilities. And now finally we talk about and we try to practice inclusion, which means that we adjust to the needs of people with disabilities and we accommodate them. What is intelligence? Intelligence is, or IQ, intelligence quotient, is an artificial norm, an artificial number that is based on some tests created by people, and in that test people get some scores, and what happens is that that shows their mental age, and that's divided by their chronological age, and multiplied by 100, and how we get intelligence. We can picture it on a Bell's curve, so you can see it on the picture, where about 68% fall within the 70% um, categories. They are the average, and then on each side we have people who score lower and people who score higher. 100 for IQ is the quote unquote norm. That's what an average person would score like. However, people in disability studies and scholars believe that this is all flawed and it's very artificial, and um, these tests may not work for people from culture diverse environments. They may not work for people who speak different language or who grew up in a different environment and might not really adjust to these tests really well and respond to them. So it's just an artificial concept. Some people like to use it, but it's broadly used in schools and in psychology and to diagnose people and label them. Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the fourth edition, which is the older edition, lists some criteria for mental retardation. You can read it on this slide. It did divide retardation into mild, moderate, and severe and profound by some standard tests, and that would be divided by the IQ levels. However, the new edition of the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, the fifth edition, does not talk about mental retardation. It talks about intellectual disability, and it does not split this into different categories. It just talks about the impact on everyday tasks, such as and in domains such as language, reading, writing, reasoning, knowledge, memory, and also empathy, social judgment, interpersonal communication skills, friendships, self-management issues like personal care, jobs, money, recreation, and school and work tasks. Most people would fall into the mildly affected category. If we look into the division of people with mental disabilities, about 13% would have other forms of mental retardation or intellectual disabilities, while the rest would have what would be mild mental retardation according to the old manual. There are some common syndromes associated with mental disabilities: fetal alcohol syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, and Down syndrome are all or used to be, I should say, characterized with or put together typically with mental disabilities. However, with ongoing research and understanding, it is clear today that most genetic, physical, sensory, or learning disabilities are not mental deficiencies. So, in the past, people with cerebral palsy, for example, or deafness, autism, dyslexia, ADHD, Down syndrome, schizophrenia, depression, and so on, they would be considered to be mentally retarded, quote unquote. But that is no longer true. Now, what we know about those people is that quite often it is problems with communication or in communication that makes them appear as mentally disabled, but they might not be. They might also just be thinking differently and be differently wired than the neurotypical people. So even people who are completely nonverbal, who can type, can show us how intelligent they are. There is one theory that I really like, and that's the theory of multiple intelligences by Howard Gardner. In 1983, he identified 8 intelligences. I wonder if you can guess which ones they are. So there's not only one intelligence and not only one IQ number that we can measure and assign to a person, but he came up with 8 different intelligences, and those are to be. He called it. He used different terms for it. This is to put it in different language. He says that a person can be word smart, logic smart, picture smart, body smart, music smart, people smart, and self smart. And this slide shows you how these intelligences are titled. In other words, there is verbal linguistic intelligence, that's the word smart, logical mathematical, that's the number smart, visual spatial, picture smart, musical, rhythmical, that's music smart, bodily kinesthetic, body smart, and then there is people smart, that's the interpersonal, and intrapersonal, that's self smart, people who are very good when they make things on their own and when they work individually and not with others. There were other intelligences added to that. As you can see on the slide, that's the naturalist intelligence and also existential intelligence. I would add computer smart to it these days because that's an intelligence that shows as a very specific type of skill that some people have. If you want to learn more information about mental illnesses, such as schizophrenia and depression and mania, you can also review the additional PowerPoint. Otherwise, that's it in a brief about psychosocial disabilities or mental disabilities or intellectual disabilities.